Thank you so much, Marissa.
Oh, sorry,
and,
just before you get going, I thought about 40 minutes for the talk and then 20 minutes for discussion. So I'll give you a warning in the chat box when it's 40 minutes.
Thank you so much. We're going to try and be a bit shorter than that so that we have more time for questions. But we'll see how we go. And of course, happy to share and do any other follow-up conversations as well. I had to invite my colleague Teresa to join me this evening. So for those of you not aware, it's 8 o'clock at night in Sydney. So both Teresa and myself have got our pajamas on, which you can't see. So we really contemplated that we will be in a good state of mind to do this, but we saw each other today. We had a wonderful workshop thinking about student experience today. So it was wonderful to connect and to prepare for the presentation this evening and this afternoon for you in South Africa. So as always, it warms my heart and it makes me extremely homesick to be involved in and do work with any of my colleagues in the South African higher education system. It will always be home and it will always have a special place in my heart. My new home here is with Teresa at Western Sydney University, and you will see that we sort of bragging on my background about the fact that we are now #1 in the world for our sustainability impact rating in the Times Higher Education. So we're really proud for that achievement. But to Marissa's point, the University of Western Sydney has got multiple campuses towards the west of Sydney. And it's really a university for the people of Western Sydney. And it might not be the typical profile of Australian student that you would expect. We have the majority of our students at our university is low socioeconomic students. English is not their first language, so immigrants and others. So we have what we call the college at Western Sydney University, and that's where I met Teresa. She was already there when I joined about 4 years ago. She's heavily involved in the academic pathway provision there, and that's why she was the most knowledgeable expert about transition pedagogy that I wanted to invite her to join me for this presentation. So at the college, we do similar work that you do in the extended programs at the University of Pretoria at the Mamelodi campus. And as you heard, I was involved in the review in July of 2021. I can't believe that it's so long ago already. It feels like just a few months ago. Unfortunately, that was a remote review, but it was really helpful. And I reflected as I was preparing for this evening on that review, and I read through the report again. And I can honestly say for all of you on the call that's involved in that program, what really struck me and what I remembered today was the response we got from the students that we interviewed and the difference that you're making in the lives of the students that you touch in these programs. And that's always a good reminder of why we do what we do. So that all came back to me as I was reading through the notes in the report of the review. Also, you would have seen a lot of references to transition pedagogy. So as I was going through the review with the panel, we asked a lot of questions about what you do in the extended programs. And Teresa will know it well. I always, when I was at the college, I always speak about the special source. What do we do at the college? So the model at Western Sydney University is that we have the college, which is an entity that belongs to the university, and we at the college offer the pathway programs and courses to students. So our students who do not meet the entry requirements, they would enter the university through the college, and they would do the first year or an extended first year with the college, and then they would transition to main campus or to the main university courses. So for me, it was always important to talk to the staff about what do we do at the college that's different from what a student would receive if they go straight into a degree program at the university. We have to do something special, which I always refer to as the special sauce. So when I was doing the review, I was always thinking about what is it that you're doing in the extended programs that's the special sauce and that makes this a differentiated experience for the students. Everyone we spoke to spoke so passionately about the work that they do and how important the students are, and how, and again, how the students speak about the teachers and the lecturers that they come across, the counselors, And some of you on the screen was even mentioned by name by some of the students, having impacted the lives of them as they were going through this program. Why we made such recommendations, and a few recommendations about transition pedagogy, was not to say that that's the be all and the end all that you have to follow. And we hope after this presentation today that you would have a better understanding and sense of it. There's lots of literature about that, and Teresa will refer to some of that and give you a few pointers. But what I missed was a narrative, a common understanding of what is the underlying pedagogical approach that you're following with these programs. And is it purely that students have a longer period of time to complete the same content that they would complete when they go straight to the main campus or into the degree programs? Or what is the special sauce that we offer them? What do we do to make sure that they're successful? And there were lots of ideas, lots of tactics, lots of strategies, but there wasn't a common narrative of this is what we do, that we're all on the same page, and that we can measure the success of implementing or following the same pedagogical approach and having a philosophy of what we do in this extended program. So the recommendations that you've read around that was really to give an example of such a pedagogical approach that fits well with extended programs or pathway courses. And Teresa will speak more about that. So it was really about making sure that there's thinking that goes into this. It might be at the end of the session today, or after you've discussed it, that you decide that this is not the pedagogical approach that we want to hang our hats on and that we want to use as our story or our narrative, but it might be that it can point you in a direction that can give you a foundation. And you would all know, as academics and practitioners and professionals in universities and higher education institutions, that we like to have philosophical foundations for what we do. And when in doubt, when we think about how to assess students, what to teach students, then we have something that we can draw back to, and that we can go back to, and that we can read about to make sure that we're doing the right thing, and that we have that common understanding and foundation for the work that we do. So what makes this different from students going straight into degree programs? What happens when they transition? And that's why transition pedagogy is such an important principle. And what happens with them not only once they go to main campus, and we heard many of your students saying that when they leave this Mamelodi campus and the extended program and they go to what they refer to, I think, as main campus, that they felt really lost and that they felt like a number because they got the special attention and they got the special sauce from being part of this program. So what do we do to ensure that they are successful once they've transitioned and that they're ready to face that? So I hope after today that you will have a shared understanding of either something that you do believe in or that you agree with, or that it will raise some questions and that it will lead you to seek a bit further. So as was mentioned at the beginning, Teresa has been working in higher education for many, many years. She is in her previous role, she was the director for the academic pathways. So she's responsible for almost 5,000 students at any given time that moves through the college into our university. So she works with many academics in different disciplines on the programs and the courses that we offer at the college. So I'm really handing over to Teresa now to take you through a few basic principles and the philosophy and foundation of transition pedagogy, and then I'll take it back. Sorry, Teresa, you could have shared the slides, but I think I covered my introductory slide, but happy for you to share just to keep us on track with the presentation.
Yep. I'll start sharing. Does that come up for everyone? Yep, great. So I will need to skip forward a little bit because that's what Nicoline's just covered. Oh, sorry, no, it's not. It's that's the overview of what we're hoping to cover today. So Nicoline's done her context piece. I wanted to talk a little bit about transition pedagogy as a philosophy, and then talk about what does transition pedagogy mean for curriculum, for delivery and student support. And then we've got time for questions and discussion at the end. So that's what Nicolene has covered. Was there anything further you wanted to say, Nicolene, or have we gone over it?
Maybe I can just elaborate a little bit on the terms of reference of the review. So obviously we're not going to cover the full terms of reference. We looked during the review, we looked at governance, we looked at the vision of the campus, we looked at teaching and learning policies. We also looked at the impact of the pandemic. So there were various elements that you probably read about in the review report. What we will focus on in terms of findings was in relation to transition pedagogy. And as I said before, it's not necessarily recommending that that's what it is, but that there's an investigation and a discussion following the presentation of whether that's something that you want to pursue further. Thanks, Teresa.
Thanks, Nicolene. So I would like to say hello to everyone and hello across the continents, I guess it is today. So it's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you about transition pedagogy and about some of the things I've learned about how best to teach students in a pathways context over the last 25 years, which makes me feel very old as I say that. And as I was thinking about this presentation, I was reflecting on the fact that I did start in teaching in a pathways institution around about 1996, 1997. And I started to put a bit of a teaching toolkit together, as you do, thinking about how I might have particular learning activities in class that suited the type of learners that were in a pathways context. I'd previously taught at a Sandstone University, so it was very apparent that this was a different group of learners with different needs. So I started to think about strategies for helping them understand difficult concepts, helping them unpack academic texts. So a few activities and a few ideas around how best to support the kind of students that were in my classes. Fast forward about 15 years to 2012, and I came across the concept of transition pedagogy. I went to a workshop, Sally Kift was there, Marsha Devlin, these are some of the gurus of transition pedagogy in Australia. And transition pedagogy at that stage as a concept was fairly new. So they were just sort of starting to put these ideas together around a coherent narrative, as Nicolene said. And I realised that some of the things that I'd been doing through my teaching to that point fit in very nicely with the philosophy of transition pedagogy. So I'm hoping that some of the things I talk about will resonate with you, and you'll realise you're actually doing some of these things. But it is, as Nicolene said, what's really useful with the concept of transition pedagogy is having that common narrative, having that thread, if you like, that sews all the bits together, that allows you to think coherently about what are we doing, why are we doing it, how are we doing it, who are we doing it with, who are we doing it for. So I think that, to me, that's the benefit of having that narrative, that guiding principle of transition pedagogy. So as you can see on this slide, transition pedagogy is the name given to a set of principles or a guiding philosophy which positively shapes the first year student experience and has been shown to increase students' success. The organising principles, there's 6 of them. So it's transition itself, so students transitioning in from other life experiences or from secondary school into a tertiary environment, the transition in, the transition through the curriculum, and then the transition out, which for a pathway student is, of course, a transition into further studies in their bachelor course. Diversity, so that's a diversity of learner needs, a diversity of types of students. It's not just about ethnic diversity, so it's also about students with disabilities, students who might be juggling work as well as studies, students with carer responsibilities, that whole diversity of types of learners that come into the first year experience. The design of curriculum, so transition, diversity, design. engagement, and obviously engagement is really critical in the first year experience, because it's usually that engagement that will ensure both their success but also their continuing studies in through their degree. Assessment, and then evaluation and monitoring. So they're the principles, a set of guiding principles that make up transition pedagogy. The other quote I've got on the slide here speaks to the fact that transition pedagogy has been conceptualized as the optimal capacity to deliver an integrated and holistic first year experience when intentionally designed first year curriculum is harnessed to mediate the learning experiences of diverse commencing students. So transition pedagogy offers course designers, academics, professional staff, and institutional leaders an integrative framework and a common language for a whole of institution approach that builds curriculum and support structures to ensure student success is not left to chance. And I think that's why intentional design in that quote there is so important. And it's why the opening statement for the synopsis for today's presentation draws on a quote from Tinto that access without support does not equal opportunity. So it's that support that we can build into the curriculum in an intentionally designed fashion that's so important in terms of transition pedagogy. When you take a transition pedagogy approach to the student experience, you think of the whole student experience. You think of you take a whole of institution approach, from transition in, through and out, as I said before. So from how do we support students from the point of offer through to orientation, through their course of study, and then out graduating or further studies and graduation. And you think about the support that students need, how it's framed, how it's integrated, and how it's received and used by the student themselves. So I wanted to talk first of all about what does transition pedagogy mean for the curriculum itself. And you can see there I've said that it's useful to think of the curriculum as the glue. And what I mean by that is that students in all of their diversity, it's within the curriculum that commencing students must be engaged, supported, and realise their sense of belonging. So it's the curriculum experience that students share. So they might have all sorts of differences and different interests and so on, but it's in the curriculum. It's the curriculum that they share, that they have in common. And it's through the curriculum that we can have the most impact on students' success. So it's important to think about curriculum or a program of study holistically, not just as discrete sets of subjects that make up a program. And thinking holistically, of course, means thinking about what is it that the students need to know and be able to do at the end of this program when they transition out. One cautionary word that I would provide is not to be too fixated on the content. Content is important, of course, and for first year students, there's certain foundational knowledge that they will need to be successful in their bachelor studies. But in many ways in the first year, the most critical thing is teaching students how to learn how to learn. So the content for me is a vehicle for teaching students the academic skills that they will need for success. And that segues nicely, I think, in terms of embedded support through intentional design, the second point there. In all of our programs at the college, we embed academic literacy and academic skills into the curriculum. And I think I saw in the review that you do something similar. And And that's really important, that we're building we're consciously building those subjects or those skills into the curriculum. It could be through standalone subjects, an academic literacy subject or an academic skills subject, or it might be that those skills are made explicit in the discipline subjects themselves. But I think it's important that those kind of academic literacy, academic skills subjects are not seen as remedial, but rather that they're teaching students the nature of academic culture. That what are the rules of the game, if you like, building up their self-efficacy. And in those academic skills type subjects, it's really important not to take for granted that students know how to do things. So in the sort of subjects that we have, academic skills type subjects, we will teach explicitly time management skills. We'll teach explicitly how to take notes in a lecture. We don't assume that a student walks into a lecture for the first time and knows how to take notes. So we teach them how to take notes. We teach them how to organise those notes for the purposes of study, for the purposes of preparing for an assessment. I think as well, with those kind of academic literacy, academic skills subjects, it's really important to contextualise them for the students, contextualise the learning. And what I mean by that is that they're not seen as generic skills that you're teaching in a vacuum, but rather you link those skills to the discipline that the students are studying and the future selves that they imagine as professionals in the workforce. So if you're teaching how to read an academic text, for example, you might take a text that they're actually reading in one of their other subjects. If they're doing engineering, get them to do an oral presentation where they're imagining that they're presenting to their board of directors, or they're in a meeting where they have to discuss a problem, an engineering problem. So the oral presentation becomes linked to the kind of things they might do in their profession. I think it's critical that we take that the curriculum takes students from where they are to where they need to be, and it does it explicitly. And I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. But being explicit is also about scaffolding student learning. So scaffolding, as we know, enables the learner to solve a task or achieve a goal that would be beyond their unassisted effort. So we do a lot, I'm very big on scaffolding. So we do a lot of scaffolding of learning tasks, the learning tasks themselves, scaffolding of assessment, scaffolding of knowledge, so that we're building up from a basic concept to a more complex one. Scaffolding of assessments, I think, is really important in pathways education. So you might be doing some of this already, but scaffolding assessment would be an example of that. Might be if students are writing a report or an essay, you might get them to do a draft that's worth 5 or 10%, and they have to hand that in. They get feedback, helps the student to see whether they're on track. They incorporate the feedback, and then they build that into the final report or the final essay. You might have workbooks or you might have workbooks or logbooks that students use to reflect on their learning in class, and they can hand those in and get some feedback on how they're going. So there's lots of ways of scaffolding assessment, but I think it's really important that they get that opportunity to develop some ideas, check in, make sure they're on the right track before a major assessment is submitted. So what does transition pedagogy mean for delivery? It's really important, I think, that delivery or instruction is explicit, that it's helping students acculturate to what it means to be a learner in a higher education, what are the expectations, and that it demystifies higher education. I like to talk about teachers being cue givers, C-U-E, cue givers. And what I mean by that is, rather than us hiding the rules of the game, if you like, from students and hoping they acquire various academic skills by osmosis. We explicitly teach those things. An example might be that if you're giving a lecture, you don't assume, as I said before, that they know how to take notes. And you pause and would say, this is a really important point, or this is a key theory, and I think you should write this down. So you're giving those cues, constantly flagging and signalling to students how what you're saying is relevant to what they did before, to the week before, what you'll be doing the week after, how what you're doing connects to the assessment, and this is why it's important. So all of those cues that help students to build self-efficacy. I also like to think of being a cue giver as a bit like being the student being in a foreign land. So higher education for pathways students is an unfamiliar culture. So it's like being in another country where you don't speak the language, you haven't got a map, you don't know where you're going, you can't ask anyone for help because you don't speak the language. So what we're doing in being explicit in our instruction is we're giving them the roadmap, we're giving them the translator app that helps them navigate and understand what higher education culture is all about. The next point there is around unpacking and modelling. So in terms of being in the classroom, I think it's really important that we spend time in class unpacking assessment in particular. So actually talking to students about what is this assessment actually asking you to do. If it's an essay, for example, it might be helping them to identify the various arguments or the various theories that they'll need to engage with. Or if it's a type of genre of writing, if it's a lab report, what is a lab report? What's the structure of a lab report? So unpacking what the assessment is and what they need to be able to do. How to study for exams is another way of unpacking assessments. So again, that not assuming that if you have exams as assessments, not assuming that students even know how to study properly for an exam. For many students, that's the reason why they're in a pathways institution, because they haven't done well in their year 12 exams, their final secondary school exams. So actually teaching students how to prepare for an exam, how to study for exam, how to revise is important. You can use previous students' assessments as models and get students to use a rubric or a marking criteria to obviously de-identified previous students' assessments, and get the current students to use a marking criteria or a rubric to assess previous students' assessments. And in that process, they both come to understand what the rubric means and also what would be expected of them if you have a range of samples, a range of student samples. So you've perhaps got something that was a high distinction, something that was just a pass assessment, and the students can mark them themselves. You can use annotated sample assessments. So sample assessments that you've annotated yourself that you share with the students so they can see where a student has done well and where they might need to improve. Which takes me to the third point there, feedback and feed forward. So in terms of assessment, again, obviously really, really important that the feedback for pathways students is encouraging, because it can be very discouraging if you get an assessment back and there's just red pen everywhere, or lots of in-text comments if you're marking online. So the feedback needs to be encouraging, and I think kept to a minimum. I always advise staff that probably have 3 key takeaways for the student and explicitly say that. So I always say start off with something they've done well. So even a student that's failed, might have attempted to engage with the material. So you can say something positive, I can see that you've tried to engage with the material. However, and then I think 3 key points. So we keep it simple and very focused. And the feed forward element is a really important part of that. So the idea that you're showing students that this assessment, they're not just getting feedback on this assessment, but what the 3 key points are also pointing them to the areas that they need to focus on to do better in the next assessment. So that's the feed forward. And if you've got your assessment design well structured, it should be the case that whatever they've done in one assessment is teaching them things that they will then apply in the next assessment. And so that feed forward then works really nicely. The other thing, of course, in terms of the classroom is the importance of helping students to develop a sense of belonging. And that's belonging to the classroom itself. So feeling that they've made friends with other students, that the teacher is approachable, a sense of belonging to the institution as a whole, because a lot of students in Pathways institutions have a very negative self-narrative. So I don't really belong here, I'm not smart enough, I don't come from the right side of the tracks, all of that narrative is going on. So it's really important that they feel that actually I do belong here and I can achieve. So that sense of belonging is really important. It's also a sense of belonging to the discipline itself, feeling that they're acquiring the language, the concepts, the ability to perform in this discipline, but also a sense of belonging to where they see themselves in the future, a sense of belonging to that professional self that they imagine themselves in the future. And I noticed in the review that some of your students said that they felt very supported while they were with you, but then when they went to the university, or the main campus, was it, they felt a bit lost. And look, we sometimes hear our students say a similar thing, but one of the things we have done in our academic skills type subjects is we get the students to form little study groups or buddy groups, and they work with students together, they support each other through their studies. But what we've found is that those study groups or buddy groups tend to be enduring. So when they go to the main campus, they seek out the students who they were buddied up with back at the college. And even if they're not studying the same course at the university or they're not in the same subjects, they'll still have that little support network that they can come back to, certainly initially when they transition to the university. And the final area I wanted to talk about in relation to transition pedagogy is what does it mean for student support? So I think it's really important that there is a comprehensive retention strategy. So some thinking around how do both academics and professional staff play a role in supporting students. So making sure, for example, that or rather asking the question, who's making sure that the students have enrolled properly? Who's making sure that the students have got a proper timetable? Who's making sure that the students know where their classes are? All of those things that happen before a student even comes into your classroom are really, really important for all students, but particularly pathway students who can feel really alienated and put off by the sort of administrative side of a university. If they're the first person in their family who's ever gone to university, they don't have anyone saying to them, oh, this is what orientation is and this is why you should go. So we need to build in that support for students from the outset. Then questions around, who's following up on students who haven't been attending? Who's following up on students who've missed an assessment or failed their first assessment? So thinking about those things and then building a retention strategy around that. Thinking about the pressure points of where interventions are most needed. So which groups of students are most vulnerable and in need of additional or customised attention? It might be students with disabilities need a particular type of support. It might be students who've got poor attendance need a particular intervention. Students who are repeating a subject need a different type of attention. Those who've failed the first formative task, what are you doing in relation to those students and supporting them? And then I think in terms of student support, it's really important to pay attention to language. I've already said in terms of the classroom being positive and encouraging and feedback that has a positive element in terms of assessment, but also thinking about language in terms of the kind of the formal communications that are sent to students. It might be around their attendance or around orientation or any of those official communications that come from the institution to students. Thinking about the language both in terms of clarity for students, putting yourself in the shoes of the students, and is the language that we're using language that they would actually understand, but also language that doesn't make them feel deficient. So just thinking carefully around the language that's used in communications and that supports students. And then the final point that I've got there is the importance of a set of supporting policies and procedures that enable you to do all of the things that I've been talking about that are examples of transition pedagogy. So you don't want to be in a situation where the policies that you have undermine everything else that you're trying to do through the curriculum. So some examples I can share from my own institution is we have an early low risk task intervention procedure. And what I mean by that is all of the students in all of our subjects do a small low risk task, assessment task, within usually the first 4 weeks of the teaching session. And that is designed to give the teacher an immediate sense of how the students are travelling and whether they need some extra support. And it gives the students that feedback very early on to help them see where their learning is at and whether there's additional support that we're referring them to that they need to access. So if a student doesn't do that assessment, what we do is we reach out to them and we give them an extra week to do that assessment beyond when the due date occurred. So we're very flexible with that early low risk task, because for us, the most important thing is the student doing the task and getting the feedback. So, so we're flexible around that due date to allow them that extra week if they haven't submitted that task. Our assessment policy itself allows students to resubmit assessments during the term if they fail, and also at the end of the teaching session, if they've failed the subject as a whole in the realm of 45 to 49%, they can apply to do a supplementary assessment. So the policies are giving some flexibility for students to have another go, and that assessment policy actually applies to all of the students at the university, not just the pathways students. But you can see there that it's a policy that's mindful of the student experience, that builds in some flexibility, and that's not hampering the other things you're trying to do in terms of transition pedagogy. The final slide then that I have is just pointing you to some useful links and resources. There's lots more, of course, but I thought I'll just put 3 on that fit on the slide. So the first is a transition pedagogy website, an Australian website, and you can see the URL there for that. There's then, I've included an article by Ella Cahoon and Karen Nelson. Elika, who's from New Zealand, and Karen Nelson is originally from New Zealand, but now lives in Australia. And that's called Student Engagement in the Educational Interface. You'll be able to find that online. You can read it online as well. And it talks a lot about sense of belonging, but it very much looks at all the intersecting factors that make up the student experience, and very much takes a sort of socio-psychological perspective. And then pretty much anything by Sally Kift on the first year experience on transition pedagogy will be very useful. So Sally Kift is very much seen as the transition pedagogy guru in Australia. So yes, just typing in her name, you'll find all sorts of things, and it'll probably then also bounce off into other areas that you might be interested to explore. So that's it from me.
Thanks, Teresa. You can perhaps stop sharing, that we make sure we leave some time for questions. I'll just close with a few comments before we hand over, and hopefully there's a few questions. We'll send on notes from today and the slides and the links and everything to you, that you have it. The question that there might be in some of your minds is, how do we actually do this? How do we actually create this common narrative? How do we make staff aware of it, that we're all on the same page? And I just wanted to share a 1 minute what we did at the college to get the attention and the focus right. So we developed a strategy document for the college, and it was really important for us to bring the concept, or to establish the concept of creating connections. We really wanted to make our students feel connected to us as the college, to the university, to other students. And I'll just share for a few seconds just our strategy on a page. Just to give you an example of how transition pedagogy, and you will see that built into our main objectives. So we talk about what we do for students, what we do connecting staff. We're creating a place and a presence, as Teresa spoke about, the identity of the students belonging to the college, not with that remedial connotation, but being part of something. And there's always the money bits, as we know, that we have to work well and spend well. But this strategy and the narrative of creating connections and connecting our students from the first year into the degrees, it gave us the golden thread. It gave us the narrative, and it gave transition pedagogy the exposure that we always came back to the principles of why, as Teresa said at the beginning, why we're doing what we're doing, who we do it for, and how do we do it. So this is an example of a strategy on a page that became our narrative with our principles there. We printed this on posters, on mugs, on mouse pads, on everything that we could find, pencil bags, and anything to make people see it, and that they remember that our vision is to transform the lives of our students, and which is a lot what I heard from the students when they spoke about the program where you're at. So this is perhaps an idea, not the strategy, but to think about ways to establish those principles of transition pedagogy, or the vision of these programs at your institution. So I'll stop share, and I'm happy to take some questions.
Well, thank you very much, both of you, for staying up this late, and even if you're wearing your pajama pants. I found your presentation very interesting. And as Teresa said, everything points to Sally Kift. I made quite a few efforts to get hold of Sally Kift, but it sounds like she's more or less a freelancer now, not attached to any particular institution. And I found a Gmail address, but I didn't get any response. But I think you've been more than an adequate placeholder for her, and be very good to get all your bits of information. And it's quite interesting that you mentioned the strategy document. We've got a strategy building exercise in about 3 weeks' time. So that will be quite a lot of good advice for us. So thank you very much. But I would like to just open it up now. You can either ask your question in the chat, or you can raise your hand, and I will give you a chance to answer your question, to ask your question. So it's open to the floor now. This is what we in education call wait time.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, this is Inga Fabrice-Ratelli. Thank you for your presentation. What are the student numbers dealt with at your universities, and what staff capacity is available to you?
I think I'll give that a go, Teresa, and then you might add. So as I mentioned, it's hard to say how many students are at the college at any given time, because we have a system that students who come to the college, we have 3 terms. So the university's got 2 semesters and we've got 3 terms. And the reason we do that is that student can do multiple units during the course of an academic year, and then they can transition in time to be ready for, so they can actually complete 3 terms worth of subjects before they transition to the semester. So we allow students to transition as soon as they're ready and as soon as they've completed a certain proportion of the course and they were successful. So we have students transitioning at multiple points. So they move through the college at different speeds and different paces. So we can, at some stages, we can have 4,000 students at the college. At some stage, we can have 2,000, depending on where in their program they're at. We work on a class size of about 25 students, Teresa. That's more or less our average. We try to keep it small. We don't want to go much over 25, so that gives you the student-staff ratio. Something we didn't touch on today that might be useful for a future conversation is we have first-year experience coordinators. So we have a position in addition to the academic staff. So we have a support person, coach, success coach type position. We call them FYECs, first year experience coordinators. So in addition to the staff ratio to students, we have this additional support person to students. But the university has got 45,000 students, so you can see the proportion of the students that start with the college. But our research shows that students coming from the college are more successful longer term than those going straight into what you would refer to as the main campus. We also have an interesting change in parents actually saying to their kids, if it's school leaving students, go to the college first to, number one, see what you want to do to explore and get into the right course and get used to being at university before you transition. So it is becoming a direct application to the college as well, and not only if you don't meet the entry requirements. So I hope that answers the question. Teresa, do you want to add to that? Or
I just want to, I'm not sure, just in terms of Inga's second part, so our staff do a lot and are good, yes, but we don't have 25 students to 1 staff member. So I just wanted to clarify, so it would just be for, say, for 1 2-hour class, there would be 25 students in the class, but the teachers would be teaching 16 hours over the, so I'm not sure whether you've got, I'm not sure if you mean, if you were thinking we were saying that 1 teacher would only be looking after 25 students for the whole time, they'd probably have about 100 students that they'd have in class over the course of the week. And our first year experience coordinators look after about 180 students. That's roughly 1, yeah. But the actual classroom itself is kept to about 25.
Yeah. So
thank you very much. Can I introduce you to the new director in the Mamelodi campus, which is Professor Ntebogang Mokhalaka, and she has her hand up. So Prof. Tebogang, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, yeah. Hello, and also just to show my face to Marcel and Teresa and thank them for this very insightful presentation. I'm just going to switch off my video. Yes. My question is, Teresa mentioned something very interesting about the curriculum that, you know, when you do transition pedagogy, you know, the focus is not really on the content, but is to give the students the academic skills that they will need for success. And you mentioned the need to beef up on academic literacy, you know, academic skills modules. So just want to know, in terms of credits, how much of the credits do you give to the to the discipline content or modules, and how much you allocate to the academic literacy and academic skills. And I'm asking this because we are at a point where we will be undertaking the curriculum review as one of the recommendations that came from the review of the program. So just, yeah, if you can give us an indication of, credit allocation in that respect. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll do that, and then I might clarify what I was trying to say as well. So most of our diplomas, a sort of standard diploma, would have 80 credit points, or 8 subjects, 10 credit points each, that are subjects equivalent to what students are doing in the first year of the degree. And then we embed those academic literacy, academic skills type subjects. So they generally would have 20 credit points, maybe 30 credit points of what we call preparatory subjects. The credit that they get when they go into the degree just comes from those 80 credit points that are the subjects equivalent to those that they're doing in the first year. And what I was trying to say around content versus skills is more, it was more around when you're teaching a discipline. So if you're teaching maths, if you're teaching science, it was a cautionary word around, and it's a fine balance, but it's a cautionary word around not being too fixated by getting through the content. When you're teaching the pathways students, the contents teachers need to be thinking about the skills as well. So I know for some of our teachers, they really struggle with that balance of, I've got to get through the content. I've got to get through the content. I don't have time to do icebreakers and sense of belonging and all that stuff. But so it's about that balance, and I don't have time to teach explicitly how they do the lab report. So it's just about remembering that we're teaching the students the learning to learn skills as much as the content.
Thank you very much, Teresa. There's another question in the chat from Janine Kwambahana, who's the, I'm sure you met Nicolene, you probably saw her because she was head of the program, and she actually wrote the whole review document. She has a question that says, how many years or semesters do the students spend at your college?
So I popped the answer in there. So they would usually spend 3 terms with us. We do have extended programs where they stay a bit longer if they take a lower load, if they take fewer subjects. So some of them prefer to only take 2 subjects or a lower load. And as I mentioned before, some of them transition sooner if they're successful. So, but the usual time at the college would be 3 terms, but they can start at the start of any of the terms. So we have new intakes in term 1, new intakes in term 2. So that's what I meant with we have students at different stages. And there was another question, can students exit with the college diploma and use it at other institutions? Yes, they can. So they actually walk across the stage and they get a diploma if they meet the requirements, and they sought after by other institutions. It's a difficult thing for us because we're very proud of them that they're successful. And for us, we often debate what does success mean, because they don't necessarily, obviously we want them to stay with Western Sydney and we try our best to give them the best experience to stay, but they do also go to other institutions. But for me, that's still success because it helped them to be successful in being admitted to other institutions. So they quite sought after.
Well, thank you very much. Erica Muller is greeting you. She said she knew you at UJ.
Yes, I saw her name, and I was hoping that it is the Erica that I know.
She's running the Engage program, which is the engineering equivalent of the ECP that we have in science and commerce. I think we've got no time left, but I'd like to sneak in my question.
Yeah.
In South Africa, we've got a particular problem about the quality of science and maths teaching at the schools, and the quality of that students might be intelligent, but they haven't done very well, and they've missed out on some very basic concepts that they should have been taught at school. And it really is in response to Teresa's point about playing down the content at the expense of the skills and so on. And we have a very high priority for the content, because that is one of the real problems that we're trying to address. So I just wondered if you had a response. And then after that, I see Muniwang has her hand up. And there's a question from Mekidela in the chat. If one of you would answer Mekidela in the chat, then I'll give Muniwang a chance and then we'll say goodbye. So thank you. If you could answer my question.
My question was exactly yours in terms of the teachers, especially because our focus is more on the content than the pedagogy as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Muniwang is a mathematics educator and she's a senior researcher in something called the Pre-University Academy, which is where we're trying to make students more ready for even accessing university. So over to you.
Look, I hear it from our maths teachers as well, that students don't necessarily come into our courses with the level of maths that they would hope. And so they're sort of trying to do, the teachers are trying to do catch up, plus teach the content that they're meant to be teaching in the subjects that we deliver. And because maths is not my discipline, but I guess my response would be perhaps to be thinking about problem-based learning, so that what you're delivering, so that you're getting through the content, but trying to teach some of the academic skills that getting student in the doing, in the problem-based learning, in the doing, they're actually acquiring some of those academic skills. So it might be a matter of how you deliver the content, how you're thinking about the content, and what you're getting the students to do in the classroom. But I know it's a difficult balance.
It's a hugely difficult balance. I'm aware of that. Well, thank you. I really want to. I mean, it was really great of both of you to volunteer to do this, and it's come at a very timely moment because we're busy with our curriculum renewal. For those of you who are here, the talk has been recorded. And I don't know if you and Nicolene would like a copy of the recording.
Yes, that would be useful. And as I mentioned before, we'll send over some notes and some further information as well.
Joni, who is our very expert administrator, I think will find a way and to distribute it also within the university, because there might have been people who couldn't come. But I'd like to thank very much the people who took the time to attend this one, and just to say that although I tried to space these two talks, we've got another talk same time next week, but for her it's 6 o'clock in the morning, so you can guess where she is. She's in Massachusetts, and Hannah Sevian will be giving a talk on an asset-based approach to I forget the complete, but it's a new way of looking at also students who are either disadvantaged or not fitting in well to an academic environment at the University of Massachusetts. So we've heard from both hemispheres, if you look on East and West. And thank you so much. And I hope to get the material from you very soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
And
thanks
bye-bye,
for the
everybody
opportunity.
else.
Thanks,
And
everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Teresa and Nicolene.